Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to tonight's talk, Ecological Stories and Journeys, which is the final talk in a series of artist talks presented in conjunction with the exhibition on view, Bronx Calling, the Fifth AIM Biennial. My name is Angelica Pomar, and I am the Education and Public Programs Coordinator at the Bronx Museum of Arts. Before we begin, I would like to share a few announcements. Bronx Calling, the Fifth AIM Biennial is currently on view at the Bronx Museum through March 20th. Our admission is always free, but we ask that you reserve a time ticket on our website at bronxmuseum.org. Bronx Calling features the work of 68 graduates from the AIM Fellowship, a program within the Bronx Museum's Education Department that offers professional development resources to early career artists residing in New York City. Founded in 1980, AIM consists of an intensive series of professional development seminars and network building activities designed to help artists strengthen and sustain their art careers. Please note this talk will be recorded and available on our website. And following the initial discussion, you'll be able to submit questions to be answered via the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen. So with all that being said, I'd like to pass it to the AIM Biennial curators, Eva Mayabal Davis and Ian Coffrey. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, the entire team at the Bronx Museum, the artists who are here tonight, and our moderator for participating in this talk, and the audience as well. This is the final artist talk of this series for Bronx Calling, the Fifth AIM Biennial, and we'll be looking at the intersections of the natural environment along with stories and personal journeys. Today we have Carlos Jiménez Cahua, who was born in Lima, Peru, is a visual artist who lives and works in New York City. He makes work about American indigeneity with a focus on that of the Andean region. He's a member of Rebirth, a group that organizes events and publishes narratives around Andean culture and the Andean diaspora. Eliza Evans, who experiments with sculpture, print, video, and textiles to identify disconnections and absurdities in social, economic, and ecological systems. Her work has been exhibited at the Bronx Museum, the Sula Art Museum, Austin Peay State University, Clarksville, Tennessee, Thomas Urban Gallery, where she participated in a show that Jessica was also in. She's our moderator for today, and we'll be reading her bio. Ecofeminisms, which was curated by Monica Fabajanska, who hosted our first talk. Also at the University of Connecticut's Chautauqua Institution, Edward Hopper House, Brooklyn, and has appeared in the New York Times, Art in America, Hyperallergic, the Brooklyn Rail, and Dissent magazine. A law review article on her work is forthcoming in the Cardozo Arts and Entertainment Law Journal. Residencies include the Art Law Program, National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, UC Santa Barbara, the Bronx Museum AIM program, and she's currently a member of New Inc., the New Museum's cultural incubator. Evans was born in a Rust Belt steel town and raised in rural Appalachia. She currently splits her time between Tennessee and New York.
The third artist we'll be presenting is Nari Kim. She's a Korean-born multidisciplinary artist living in East Harlem. Her work explores intersectional feminism, Southern identity, and virtual space's effect on things through her multimedia installations, drawings, and sculptures. She received her master's degree of fine arts at Hunter College in New York, bachelor's degree in fine arts at the Hongking University in Seoul in 2009. She has presented her works in diverse venues, including the Bronx Museum, Project Art, Space 776, 776 Gallery here in New York, as well as Coben Project Baltimore and the Delaware Center for Contemporary Arts, Wilmington Common Center in Seoul, and many others. She has participated in the Artist Fellowship Program with the Bronx Museum, and her work has been written about in Hyperallergic, Bushwick Daily, and Artsland. She's received multiple awards from Arco Foundation, the AHL Foundation, and the Robert W. Deutsch Foundation in Baltimore. Our moderator, Jessica Segall, is a multidisciplinary artist based in New York City, using landscape and bureaucracy as material. She explores nature and belonging through interspecies, site-specific work, and her recent exhibition includes is at the Fries Museum, the National Museum of the American Jewish History, and Koronia Museum of Art. and screenings at her TED Climate Countdown and COP26 in Scotland. Jessica received grants from the Pollock Krasner Foundation, New York Foundation of the Arts, New York State Council of the Arts, Art Matters, and the Harpo Foundation, and has attended art residencies, including Skowhegan, MacDowell, and Van Eyck Academy. Her work has been featured in Cabinet Magazine, the New York Times, Art in America, and she received her BA from Bard College in 2000 and MFA from Columbia in 2010. Please join us in giving them a warm welcome, and just reminding everyone who's joining us today to ask questions and send them through the Q&A function. And we'll pass it over to Jessica to begin moderating this evening's panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. And I want to thank Ian and Eva for inviting me to help facilitate this conversation on ecology in the works in the AIM Biennial. And I also want to thank all the artists and all of you for coming, and the Bronx Museum. Also to note that please do write your questions in the Q&A chat box, and I'll be taking those after all the artists introduce their work and we start conversations. So there'll be room towards the end of the talk for your questions. So first I want to talk about, what it's like to enter the museum and sort of confront these works. Materially and visually, I kind of enter and see a lot of pillars, a lot of verticality, and maybe one broken column. And also the material from the three artists presenting today, if I were to break it down into the most basic elements, I'm looking at stone, peppers, and corn, right? And what makes these works artworks is that they're all going through some kind of transformative process, and the kind of personal narratives and stories and community storytelling that's happening around these works is what gives them their essence, right? And in thinking about framing all these three works under ecological concerns, I see a couple commonalities. I see strategies for survival, and not just for survival, but flourishing within survival. I see the localized, embodied stories of home, that many of them are steeped in family history. For example, Eliza took inherited land and made it everyone's property. Carlos planted heirloom maize in the Bronx and on Governor's Island. Nari's pickles, which are not a family recipe, is a self-portrait of physicality and survival. So all these approaches kind of deepen this idea that when we're thinking of climate change, we're not just thinking of an abstract whole, like a general existential threat. There's conversations and things that connect us. So climate change is a cultural loss. And confronting existential climate change is restoring our community relationships to the land. Climate change is a conversation that connects us but has an asymmetrical threat where you can't remove discourses of locality and subjectivity. In these works, I also see forms of protest and sharing networks, protesting extraction and protesting cultural loss. So, and in light of the fermentation that's actively happening in both Carlos and Nari's work, I wanted to read some text that I pulled from Lauren Fournier's project on feminism and fermentation that I think speaks to all of these works. So one of the characteristics of fermentation is that it embodies both preservation and transformation. What preservations and transformations need to take place for us to cultivate more ethical ways of being together in the world? To confront the tension between preserving and the contributions of our ancestors and transforming them in the light of current contextual needs, the histories we inherit. So in thinking about that quote and thinking about inheritance in light of your work, I think about the inheritance of a wounded planet. I think about the inheritance of a unfair economic system, inheritance of property as well, which creates asymmetrical wealth and assets. And I want to, when I ask you all to describe your work in general, to think about how you speak to resistance and community building in your works. Okay. But now I want to kind of introduce the artists and have them present their work. And I want to start with Carlos and give one more prompt for you before you start to present your work and images. I want to think about some of the biggest political divides in this country. It's not between state to state, it's between rural and urban spaces. And I'm thinking about that and the complexities of home and landscape and what you're bringing to the Bronx Museum. Specifically the planting of heirloom maize in the Bronx and on Governor's Island for your project, Chicha De Jora. And I want to see how local climate plays into the production of literally bringing these kind of saved heirlooms to a new location and an urban location. And then I also wanted to ask you, in the beginning of the exhibition, you poured some of this fermented corn as an offering to open the exhibition. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about that sort of ritualistic practice, and if you're bringing in Andean phenomenology into your work, which I'm referring to that term mostly from Macarena Gomez Barris in her text Extractive Zone, where she defines placing the subject in a multi-relational and non-binary zone as an ecological worldview. So that's a lot, but first it'd be great if you could present your work and share images of the project.
Sure, of course. Thank you. Thank you to everyone, especially Ian, Ava, and Jessica for the panel tonight. So let me go and try sharing my screen to show you a set of slides I've got for you today. Is that working? Do you see a black screen? Somebody? Okay, great. I want to thank everyone that was part of the show, the artists, the people, even who curated it, and Jessica for tonight, and everybody that was involved. And I'd like to jump into the talk. I know we're limited on time. The title that I've offered for you tonight is Ruas Haikuna, which is Quechua. And maybe I don't have to go into the more logical breakdown of how this word means what it means, but effectively it means things that I have done in a literal sense. Could also be things that I have made, but I would prefer to lean on the meaning of things that I've done, specifically because what I'm going to show you in these small sets of slides are not only my artworks, certainly I'll show that, but and also what I have at the Bronx Museum now. I'd also like to show you some of the things that I've looked at that kind of influenced me a little bit, like an artist studio visit, as opposed to say an artist talk per se, which are very, of course, distinct species. To start with, I want to share with you some images from a trip I took to this archaeological site called Caral. It's in longer talks, I might talk about how special this is, not only to me, but special it is to all of us. It's the oldest metropolis in the Americas, meaning that it's 5,000 years old. And just to put that in context, that's effectively contemporaneous with the Pyramid of Giza, and also contemporaneous with Stonehenge, just to show how ancient Andean culture is. People often think of the Inca, which were only the last ones before the Europeans invaded. But there's a deep, deep history of civilizations in this area, in the Andean region, from which, as was mentioned in the bio, a lot of my work comes. So here's a picture of one of the pyramidal structures in Caral. There you can see a tourist taking a selfie. Again, pretty interesting and special place. And I was especially excited when I saw this picture, this scene right here. This is actually not actually Caral. Caral is a network of sites along the Super River, River Valley, just north of Lima, about an hour north of Lima. It was interesting to see this because you don't often see a lot of archaeological sites that have active archaeologists working on them. And just the nature of Peru and its economy is that most of its archaeological sites, again, notwithstanding places like Machu Picchu, are actually in a state of either disregard or active looting. So seeing something like this was very special. And because there were archaeologists working there was a lot of attention paid to visitors that came. So for instance, when I was taking the tour with the guide who works closely with the archaeologists, they were saying that about this kind of cooking that exists in contemporaneous Peruvian society that I thought was really interesting, and that's this. So before I get into the details of what the archaeologists, of what the tour guide said, let me speak a little bit about pachamanca. Pachamanca is this style of cooking that, let's say, it's about as everybody's had it in Peru. It's maybe not very, very common, but something that people do with some frequency. It's kind of like meeting somebody from New York that's never had a burger or a hot dog. It's just a very large part of the culture. And how pachamanca is made is shown these sets of slides. So as you can see on the left, what you do is you make a hole, set a fire at the bottom of it, on the top of it, maybe set up a grill with metal, put hot rocks on top of it to let these rocks get fire hot. The second step would be to remove everything from the hole, put the rocks at the very bottom, but again, are fire hot. And then on top of that, which is now your heat source, right, the rocks, you put something you want to cook. Cover everything over, as you see on the bottom right picture, and then wait some time. And then what you have in there is cooked. So like I was saying, pachamanca is very, very common in many parts of the Andes. And what's interesting about it is that when it's done, it's almost always done out of beef, pork, or chicken. However, when I was speaking and taking a tour at these archaeological sites called Caral, they had mentioned that they also do they also have evidence for pachamancas made 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. But it brought an interesting question because he was saying that the pachamancas were made out of seafood and not beef, pork, or chicken. If we recall, beef, pork, or chicken are imports from Eurasia, from the Colombian trade. And so what they were saying, these tour guides, were that the pachamancas were made out of fish. And it interested me because I'd never heard of such a thing. And as soon as I got back to Lima, I asked everybody, have you ever heard of a seafood pachamanca? And nobody had. So I decided to try one. And these are actually pictures from having done it the first time. So you can see there at the bottom right, my niece helping out, covering the hole at the very bottom. And it's, so I guess to show what's in these banana leaves, it's just this right here. And we made a hole, did the rock thing, heating them up, and then wrapped all the seafood, different kinds, in these banana leaves, and then put it at the bottom. This is probably my favorite slide in this talk, because I didn't mention before that not only had my family not heard of such a thing, they were actually offended by the very idea. They thought it was totally ridiculous to make a pachamanca out of seafood. But as I'm trying to point out, pachamancas must have been made out of seafood before 1532, which is when Pizarro landed on the shores of South America. So as you can tell, people are very interested in seeing what happens, despite maybe their skepticism with the very process, which is, I think, their curiosity shows through in a picture like this. And it's very simple. You take protein, you subject it to heat, it denatures the protein, makes it edible. And so in that sense, a project, of course, worked, but more important to me in this, and maybe something we can sort of work through in the Q&A if we'd like to. Maybe it's an art project, maybe it's a community art project, but ultimately what it is an act of cooking. And all that matters in an act of cooking is that people eat it and it be delicious, for lack of a better word. And I guess to speak about how that proceeded, maybe my second favorite slide in the talk, which shows my family after that first pachamanca. Again, they were all deeply skeptical about it. I had to dig a hole myself. Nobody would help me. But here they are, all enjoying the meal. In fact, there was nothing left at the very end. So it was a successful project, and something that successful along the lines as a culinary project, whether or not it's art. And it's become kind of this family tradition that I've done in Peru whenever I go there. And I've been trying to do it in the US. And I haven't had much success shopping it out to art institutions. And I became a little bit frustrated with that. Not with any sort of rancor. I simply wanted to have, just think about this. We are all inhabiting indigenous land right now. Not that was, but that is indigenous land. But when's the last time, or when's the next time also you'll have an indigenous meal? And this is a meal that is thoroughly and totally indigenous. So I thought it might be an interesting thing to do, to collaborate with an institution to, reactivate this style of cooking. Again, out of a little frustration with it not having been done, what I decided to do is just basically do it myself. So this was done a few months ago in Clementon, New Jersey. The only special thing about it is that it's where my sister has a house, so we just did it in her backyard. And then collaborating with this group called Ramai Rais, who have now joined as a member, we basically put it together. So you can see it's a very collaborative venture. I would say maybe a total of 18 to 20 people came, and about 18 to 20 of them also had to help with the setup, the provisions and everything. And it was a lot of fun. You can see, again, some of my friends, people that I'd met that day, putting together the pachamanga. You can see the hole wrapped with banana leaves. And here is just as we're about to cover over the hole, having put, wrap things in seafood and banana leaves. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and now show the projects basically that I'm showing at the Bronx Museum. So I've been speaking a little bit about the Andes. Let me show you Andes proper. Here we are in a region called Ancash. In the background there, just as the sun is hitting the snow-capped peaks, is the Cordillera Blanca. In the foreground, we have a row of maize, rather a field of maize. And it's not just any field of maize, it's one that belongs to my grandmother's sister, an aunt of mine, who I'd met for the first time when I was traveling through this area. I was speaking to some family. They told me I had an aunt nearby, so I decided to visit, not having known that she existed, or her having known that I existed. She let me stay for a couple of days, and it was very lovely. I told her this is a picture of her putting some, wrapping together some seeds, actually for me, because I told her I was interested in farming, and especially farming things that are Andean. So she gave me some of the seeds from her very garden. These are maize seeds, and this is my first attempt at planting some of them. This is in the Bronx, very close to my studio. I just put 4 plants together, and unfortunately only 2 were able to survive because of some storms. And out of this, what happened, this is the only, the only harvest that I got, a Siamese cob with only 1 kernel that was viable. And I've actually kept that kernel instead of trying to take it forward, because it feels like my first success. And although I'm using the word success, the real fact is that it's a failure, because out of 4 plants of corn, you would expect much more than 1 seed on a Siamese cob. But since then, I've been doing this. I don't really feel I don't feel too bad about the failure of it, because that's something I've been trying every year. Just think about how agriculture farming works. You're effectively have to be sensitive to the environment and the weather and all these things. So it's something I do every year, hoping that the yield gets better and better, and also I become a better and better farmer. And the whole goal of this is to make this right here, which is the project that I'm showing in the Bronx Museum. It's called Chicha De Chora. And Chicha De Chora is an Andean beverage fermented, made out of corn. Often it's called Peruvian kind of beer. I find that term a little bit too Eurocentric, but it's also the truth that it's actually very similar to a beer making process. So beer is made out of fermented, germinated and fermented barley, and Chicha De Jora is made out of germinated and fermented corn. It's something that I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years, and I've done enough times to feel satisfied in my making it to share with others. And I've shared it with family and friends, and I've gotten buzz off of it, I've gotten drunk off of it, and it's kind of a fun thing to share with other people. And not only would I like to, and am I making this drink, what I'd also like to do is to sort of leaning into 2 areas that we often see in contemporary consumption. One of them being the farm to table movement. I not only want to make the drink, I also want to grow the plants from which it comes, and also make perhaps obviously leaning into the microbrewery movement. So it's something that I, in the future, would like to launch an actual business from, whether that's a piece of art or not. I'm not quite sure, but basically my idea is that maybe at first, like as an app or a website, you click, make a couple of clicks, give me $40, and in a week or 2 weeks, or actually probably 3, I give you this drink. So something that I'm actively brewing for the museum right now. And if you go to museums, you can see some of the artifacts from this project. And here's to show you some of the other instances of growing it in more recent seasons, getting some maize seeds that are germinated. Here we have in the foreground some that are a little further along. This is, I think, right before the pandemic on, again, using whatever land available. And being in New York City can make that kind of hard. A field of corn, just 12 in there. Unfortunately, this was not viable. some deer came and ate them when they were about a foot tall. But again, I don't feel too terrible about it because it's just something that I can keep doing every year and learn more and more based on the seasons, based on the dirt, what can come out of it. And this probably is his most successful so far. So this past summer, collaborating with this group on Governor's Island called Earth Matter. We planted some of the maize from my aunt's land, and here it is with this person in the foreground for scale. And I even measured it 11 feet tall. And so I've had most success in this past year, which is probably good progress, and hoping to just continue further so that I can have eventually viable yields that I can thereby then take that yield and make my own Chicha De Chora. So that's that project that's at the museum now. I guess to offer some context to what I'm doing, I'd like to now show you some more recent work and just a couple more slides left to show that. As it's probably obvious in the very beginning, archaeology influences a lot of what I do, and this is not my work here. This is, I can't tell you, I put this together because I'm currently traveling in Ecuador and going around some archaeological sites to understand more about, especially Ecuadorian archaeology and civilizations. So these two pieces of pottery show some faces, as you can see there, that are painted. And something that I've seen, I have a collection of maybe 100 of these so far. So I've decided to activate these by actually doing it on myself and another person, which shows here. So you can see kind of our painting skills. And what we did is we took these designs and toggling through so you can see them between each other. And I don't want to offer too much analytical kind of commentary about my work. I'm more satisfied to just simply offer exposition. But if I could offer one thing, it would be that something that I'm more and more interested in is things that are producing things or artworks that are in some senses literally embodied. So think about the Pachamanca's project where we're eating Andean culture. Think about the Chicha De Jora at the Bronx Museum where we're drinking Andean culture. And this one where we're reactivating indigenous designs and putting them on ourselves. So the more and more, the less and less it's about simply looking at something in a room that's a white cube. And the more and more it is about us being activated by, in a very literal sense, or consuming culture. That in my instance is very much inspired by Andean civilizations. That's kind of where my work tends to exist these days. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing all of those works and putting the work in the Bronx Museum in a broader context. I do have a follow-up question or thought from seeing your process of growing this heirloom corn and kind of learning with the experience, that really access to land as being an important part of that project for you. And again, thinking about Eliza's work and thinking about how that might be one of the larger challenges, like who's gonna, I know Gavin Brown did it once, but dig a hole in the floor and, light a fire underneath the gallery. It's really, where does an artist trying to bring back this culture in New York City find the space for that, the literal space for that? And it also makes me think about, some of the existential threats in Peru as well, like the threat of mining in the Andes that is contaminating the waters, the importance of preserving this heirloom seed that also is being threatened by corporations trying to patent these, the DNA, right? And the importance of that cultural continuity, right, to maintain and preserve the land. So I don't know if you have something to add to that or just kind of leave that in the air as part of the larger conversation.
Sure. I'll only say that agriculture, is important we'd like to say that it's important to older civilizations, but of course important to us now. And it's very true that it's becoming something that is becoming more and more precarious. I could speak about many, many stories from meeting people for whom, this is not a cultural activity, it's an activity of life. And maybe I'll leave that for the Q&A, people that I'm saying that I've met in the Andes. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And I see a couple of comments in the chat box, and I do want to remind everyone to put their questions in the Q&A And I'll look through those after all the artists have spoken, but great. Thank you, Carlos. And now I want to move on to Eliza's work, so everyone gets a chance. And I do also want to kind of frame a question as you're presenting. And your work focuses on the threat of extraction and exploitation of reserves and climate change in your project, All the Way to Hell. You speak of fragmentation of mineral rights. There's literally in your space fragments of a core sample that are creating a column. And I did, we mentioned the project by Maria Eichhorn earlier, and I wanted to kind of compare your work to that. So Maria Eichhorn's Documenta project, Building as an Unowned Property, in which she attempts to buy a building in Athens and to somehow legally entitle it to be unowned. And I think a lot of conservation strategies do talk about removing ownership, like removing lands out of private ownership. And I think you've taken a really interesting approach to not removing it, but compounding ownership to a point where it becomes radically unstable. Yeah, and I say ownership becomes both meaningless and even more meaningful of that. So if you could speak about that while you're presenting your work.
Great, no, thank you. And Carlos, I love seeing your work, and I'll try and see how we relate. Let me do this here. Okay, so I think, Jessica, thank you so much for posing the question. And I think I'll address the question and the larger concerns maybe in the second half of the presentation, because I want to give a little bit of context to my work. Yeah, so before All the Way to Hell, I had been working for a number of years on environmental projects more generally, and they took the installations, print media. I'm a maker, and so I enjoy making physical things. And I'm just going to talk about two things because I think there's some threads in these two projects that I pulled on for All the Way to Hell. This first one is called Transpire. It's a public installation on the SUNY Purchase campus. And these are live trees completely shrouded in shrink wrap plastic. And what happened over the course of the installation, which was several years, is, this is it's a very arty, undergraduate campus. And so the students would actually use this as an installation space for their own work, which was almost always on point, or they would just interact with me because often I was away. So here's somebody's, photograph of greenery emerging, through the shrink wrap plastic, which, was then celebrated. So I really liked, making a provocative move and then seeing what people did with it themselves that I never imagined. The second related work is called Time Machine, and it started as a goofy experiment in a residency at the Chautauqua Institution. And this is the first iteration of it. And all it was me in a little greenhouse. I got online and spending one full summer day in it just to see what our possible future might feel like. And it turned out to be a devastatingly hot day. And what I did not anticipate, because this was not really a public, because it was just a personal experiment. It wasn't necessarily public space and it wasn't necessarily private space. But when others saw what was going on, they turned it into a public space. They started bringing me ice and water and fruit. And people were communicating via social media, checking in on me, which was not at all the plan. And I thought, oh, well, let's make this more of an interactive piece, which I did, which I've done several times since. And this is the first iteration of this. and, you know, again, in a very specific context, you know, this work is about climate change. It just so happens that Chautauqua County is the home to the very first natural gas well in the United States. So it's got some real history there. And then this was performed about 7 months ago on the campus of Austin Peay State University, which is in Clarksville, Tennessee. Very different context. This is Western Tennessee. Most of the military base, Fort Campbell, is actually in Tennessee. And so there are a lot of, there's a lot of interchange between the local military base and this college campus. It's also the lowest cost four-year institution in the state. So demographically, it's a super interesting place to be. And it's a very red territory. So it was having very different conversations with a lot of students who weren't even sure climate change was real, but we were able to, in the context of this performance, you know, give each other some time and some space to wonder. Yeah, so I'll get to All the Way to Hell, which is a project. It's an, you know, it's an artwork, you know, within the Bronx Museum, but it's really a multi-year project to help me solve a personal problem. Several years ago, I inherited 3 acres of mineral rights in Oklahoma, a place I have never been. This very grainy Google Street View of that property is exactly my experience of it. I have never been to Oklahoma. I have never set foot on this land. And more importantly, I don't even own the surface. I just own the minerals that lie beneath this piece of property. But what's extraordinary in these 3 acres or any mineral right, you don't have to own the surface, but below the surface, you own it in theory all the way to the center of the earth. So even though this property is tiny in you know, in terms of fossil fuel development, 3 acres, it's massive. It's 4,000 miles deep. So the mineral rights are, I own this, you know, or any mineral right owner owns the substances within the subsurface. It could be gold, it could be, you know, zinc, and through the transmogrification of law, oil and gas are considered minerals. So this is just the satellite view of the property, just to give a little bit of scale. I don't own any particular 3 acres. I just own 3 acres within a 158-acre plot. That's the pink border. And then the yellow border is roughly the number of acres that a fracker would have to sew up in order to establish a wellhead in that area. So given my longstanding interest in the environment, I obviously could not say yes to these people. I thought, I'll just say no. I will say no to fracking. When it turns out that option is not legally available to me. And when it comes to the development of oil and gas, it is 1 acre, 1 vote. If you have more acres, you have more votes. And the oil and gas developer, all they have to do is get agreements with half the acreage needed, and they can force everybody else to submit to fracking. So this was my way out. And it may be the most powerful legal document I've ever attempted to execute. A mineral deed, mineral rights are superior to air rights. Mineral rights are superior to surface rights, which means if I were to say yes to fracking and there were a rancher or a farmer who didn't want it, it doesn't matter. You know, the wellhead can go on his or her property. So this is actually the heart of the project, because what I'm in the process of doing is giving away those 3 acres to as many people as possible. And when I launched the project, the number of people I imagined was 1,000 people. That would take me years and lots of conversations to find people who would be willing to partner with me and own a tiny sliver of the mineral property I inherited. And what this does, why the oil and gas companies find this extremely unappealing, is then they have to reach out to every other new owner and attempt to negotiate a lease. So it's time and it's money, which makes developing, fracking is a terrible business. Even now with oil and gas prices where they are, the margins are very thin. So anything that adds to the cost of developing a well could potentially hinder it. Will it work? I don't know. This is an experiment and we'll find out. So what was, because I'm a maker, what was frustrating about having this document being at the heart of the project is the lack of materiality. And so that is what the opportunity of being in Bronx Calling really opened up for me, was to give viewers in that space a real physical connection to the substances of minerals and make them accessible. Also, it's on a little bit hard to tell from this photograph, but it's on it and it takes up the entire 18-foot wall. So you get a little bit of the sense of the enormity. So it's very direct, because I wanted to ground this rather abstract project in something that you could really touch, feel, and look at. And so here are the mineral cores, a little bit closer view. But these mineral cores, just like the mineral Ds, these well core samples, which are extracted from the earth so the oil company can know if this is a good play or not. This is proprietary data. These are an archive. It's just another archive. And they're very hard to get a hold of. The oil companies pay a lot of money to extract them and a lot of money to store them, a lot of money to keep them secret. I just happened to find a source in the Permian Basin who was able to share. Now, because we don't know exactly where these came from, they're less used to us if a geologist came and took them off the wall and analyzed them. So that's what the installation is inside the Bronx Museum. And the only other way I've stood this project up in real life is with a couple of kind of goofy installations. These little boxes out in art or quasi-art contexts. And these are mineral rights exchanges. So I'm borrowing from the vernacular of, like the little neighborhood pantry or the little neighborhood library. So the idea is anybody could approach these boxes, take out a card, fill it out and send it to me. It was also during COVID, so I was really desperate for mail and, any kind of connection. And the gravel pad at the base of the box is roughly the size of the mineral right that particular property that was being given away. This particular installation is for an intervention in Pennsylvania that I can talk about, but I'm going to focus on Oklahoma in the meantime. But this is how the word got out. The project launched at the very beginning of COVID, and so I had to take advantage of traditional media, social media, because this is real estate. I listed it on the listings project, which some folks here might be familiar with, or on any or alternative, kind of art-related listing services, and slowly over time, support and began to build, and so I ended up with exposure in the art press, and also the more activist oriented press like Dissent or Heated, And then TikTok found me. I don't even have a TikTok account, but at the very end of last year, a couple posts went up, and it went a little bit viral amongst mostly Gen Z. But this was super fun because at last there was a way because of the legal strictures of the project, people can sign up and own minerals, but how do you play with them? Well, you play with them through relationship. And so these are just a few ways that people delighted in participating and sharing. And I don't know what Zen divorce lawyer was talking about, but I love when lawyers and artists get together. And also, and what I've heard repeatedly since this one particular post is mischief managed. So the Harry Potter generation has found the project. So where are we now? This is a map of everybody who's participating in the project. There are almost 7,000 of us across the US and the world. The project is limited. Not everybody can sign up. Minerals in the US are owned by citizens and permanent residents. But there certainly have been others who have participated in other ways, merely by sharing. I've done artist talks for institutions in India, Korea, and Germany. So even though people can't sign up, there are a number of ways to support it. So that, I think that's where I'll leave, like, this is the project part of it. So what at the core of the project is taking something that is of value to the fracking industry and redefining it as something that has value to people who want to preserve the planet and contribute to a desired future. And while each mineral right is individually owned, and there really are few options other than that we're all making this action collectively, for ourselves. A lot of people are signing up their children. I know of at least 2 4-year-olds who are mineral rights owners. And then Gen Z college students and anyone else are signing themselves up just to put to act their value. And we're just beginning to talk to each other in meaningful ways, through social media or people just reaching out to me individually. So the main difference I see between my work and Carlos's is Carlos comes from such an intimate interaction with the land, and I'm at the other end. My work is coming out of a place I have never been to, with which I have a very tenuous history. The only solid thing I can pull on is my legal relationship with the land. And by confounding that and complicating that, perhaps make life difficult for those who want to destroy our futures, basically. I mean, it's no smaller than that. We can talk about going forward, but for now, so this is about sharing control, and by sharing control, actually having much greater control. By giving and ceding power, we have a much better chance in creating something much more pleasant collectively. So I think I'll just leave it there, and maybe we can chat later. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Eliza. It's such an interesting project, and in one way reminds me of the last show I saw at the Bronx Museum of Art, which was the Gordon Matta Clark Fake Estates. And I actually love the lack of materiality in this, in the sense of not even being able to see what it is you own, and creating this kind of, really this kind of larger imaginary of what it can be. And I also found it interesting that it's resonating so much with Gen Z, in the sense like the population least likely to be able to afford homeownership or know what mineral rights are. That was one of the texts as well. So I think that's a very interesting proposition.
Well, I do not think everybody is of one mind in terms of why they're signing up. Early on, I was talking with some folks in their 30s who signed up almost out of desperation. This may be the only property I'll ever own, which is, so counter to what we're told is the American dream, even though we know the consequences of it. And I think the analog to the non-ownership of the piece in Greece is, this is through a very different mechanism trying to create a vacuum. It's a vacuum where activity cannot happen just because there's so many impediments to it. It's, I mean, previously I was calling this the 100-year sit-in, but really the protest can last for as long as records are kept. And we know that can be a very, very long time. Those records can be expunged too. So it's perhaps maliciously or violently, as has been the history, certainly in Oklahoma, but certainly in the US generally.
Well, that also brings up placing your work in the light of endurance performance, which is something I hadn't thought about until you placed it with the endurance performance of climate change for one day. But also, this idea of, as you mentioned, like having ceding control, ceding power as something that needs to happen to create a more symmetrical horizontality of land conservatorship.
Well, I imagine all three of us are engaged in really slow processes. Those are the challenges we're facing. And so I think it's survival, is that adaptation.
Right, I was also reading more Anna Lowenhout saying about the kind of patience required in order to be a caretaker, right? And that being very integral to all of your works here. Great, so let's have, I'll give Nari a chance to introduce her work, and then we can open up the floor for questions for everybody. And I also want to prompt Nari when presenting your work. So you have a video and installation that has this great title, Sour, Crispy, Sweet, Fiery. And in the procedural video, the maker is anonymous. And you also mentioned that the pickles it's not a familial recipe, right? But I also see it as a self-portrait. You have 72 jars of pickles, and you mentioned that that's the amount of pickles you might eat in 3 years. And also that this is a stockpile in case of emergency. So I wanted to, at first I'm thinking about the global seed vault, and I'm thinking about these kind of international attempts to stockpile seeds in case of a major climate or man-made emergency. And you would think that it would all be cereals and grains and fruits and vegetables, but it's not. There's also 20,000 cannabis seeds in the global seed vault. So again, thinking back to beyond survival, like thinking about flourishing, and what kind of future world we want based on what we care for today. So in thinking about that, I wanted to, I guess think about your choice in wanting to preserve fiery and sour for the future. And then I also want to think about what you're preparing for. In the sense you have a stockpile, and also a lot of the jars are hidden. When you visit the exhibition, you can kind of see them sneaking around the entire museum. So if you could address that while you present your work.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, can I share my screen? Okay, can you see that? So this is the work at the Bronx Museum on view right now. Actually, I made this this installation for the state of emergency, but I'm focusing more on the pandemic. So I think it's better to give you explain the background of the artwork. I guess it'll be better, start with. Okay. So I'd like to talk first about my video works. Actually, I made 2 video works, and one is on the view at the Bronx Museum. Yeah, I'd like to talk first about my video works that are made during the pandemic, because just like after 9/11, our everyday lives and our perception of the world have changed. And as the shock to our lives after the industrial revolution and world wars are equal to the pandemic. So I wanted to know and talk about the changes that took effect after beginning of the pandemic, since we live in a totally different world. So these days, too many Asian women are killed, and I'm facing everyday racism against Asian on the street. And the way to survive is to get away from the menacing situation, even though I've been racially asserted. Hearing all the reprehension about why I didn't assert them back, and I just wanted to keep on. I just to keep on surviving, and living becomes the goal from day to day. After the beginning of the pandemic, I have done microscopic routines, and this distance got shorter, and it left me with a lot of questions. So one day, I saw one of my favorite artists interview, and she said that she makes her artwork only as an artist. If she makes them as a colored woman from the third world, that are too much for her. So then these left me a lot of questions for me. So those the otherness identity and the marginalized identity can make artwork, and can these erased identity speak? If those erased identity are mine, and could I make artwork and speak? And in other words, I wanted to make artwork with my subordinated identity as a single woman, color, foreign. Yeah, and so I wanted to know how my works will unfold. So the videos show my hands making jalapeno pickles, and the other video show that I'm making fake flowers with up close viewpoint, like this one. So for the video at the Bronx Museum, I also installed the 36 to 72 jars of pickle. And because I wanted to I wanted to use it as a stockpile for the state of emergency, as I said before. And so the number of 36 comes from the calculating if someone would consume 1 jar contents within a month for 3 years. And it is a survival kit for a person that would last for 3 years. And 72 is the number of jars needed. If that's my I consume that amount. If a person consumes 2 jars of pickle in a month or for 3 years, yeah, which is amount of pickle I consume. And so I wanted to have the jars dispersed throughout the whole exhibition. And because I wanted to just find the leftover space in the exhibition spaces, so it's like it doesn't disturb other people to see other artwork, or like I don't want it to try to find a leftover space with the jar location. So that's the work I showed at the Bronx Museum now. And can I show previous work before the pandemic? Let me share. Thank you. So let me share the other artwork. I'd like to show 3 other body of my work. So this is the exhibition. Can you see it? Okay. This is the exhibition I had in 2015 in Korea, and so these are fake flowers, and that each flower has speakers embedded in, and it also play a clips of YouTube voice that is in talking about all about fake flowers. So so that YouTube channel voices from all over the world, from China factories, sometimes like, a woman lectures about how to get removal of the dust on fake flower, like that. So I make this flower and aggregate each flower into, put into one jar, one vase, and I build this pedestal and with a leg underneath. And so this fake flower reminds me of when I was young, like when I was, I used to make fake flower with my mother, because our family we had a financial problem. So we had to make fake flowers at home. And when I'm working on this piece in 2015, and I stumble into see a fake flower, same fake flowers I used to make when I was young at Kmart in New York, and that kind of shocked me, and I wanted to know what shop it was, and so I made a new the video trying to recollect my muscle memory to make fake flower. That was the after pandemic one, and this one is you see different the 2 other drawings in the bag is about how to interact, how to make the drawings with touch screen. So I drew the color drawings on it was on top of iPad, and then I played the sketch application in the back. So when I draw it, the application catch my hand movement. And so the black and white prints in the back is generated when I'm drawing onto the iPad screen. So it's a series of drawing I've been working on. It's called screen drawing. Let me show you another. So this is my solo show at Space 776 Gallery in 2016. And so you see the iPad drawings in the back. And this one is ironing board, has images of dancing water speaker on the board, and also play the speaker advertisement in the back, and also play the dancing water speaker. So when it's play, it's dancing with the screen, the video in the screen, in the monitor, play and dancing together. And this is my experiment that I've been working on. And this is another iPad drawing. And this is red tea paradise. So any audience is invited to participate to drink the teas on top of the screen. So and the video in the screen on the table playing, I'm drinking red tea, and people can drink the tea that has the image of the video from the table. So people can drink the red tea and then put that into the dishwasher sculpture next to this table. And then let me show you the last one. Here, this is my solo show from in 2017. So I showed this body of the new body of work in 2017 at BX Gallery and Space 776. So I developed it. iPad drawing you see in the back is I made it horizontal and turn it into black and white backwards. And this one was the experiment how to revert the hierarchy in the white space. Like so these are basically pedestals, and I build it first and then make the mark and like smash something onto the pedestal, and I make the scratches, right? And then it turning into sculpture. And so example, like I took the picture of the whole sculpture first in the back, and then for placing on the eye level 58 inches from the floor, and I decide the height of the sculpture, and then make the scribble and then smash it. And yeah, so this is how it made. So the sculpture, usually sculpture made first and photograph later, but like I wanted to make it photograph first and then make the sculpture to placing the picture on the placement. So this is another hierarchy, opposite hierarchy. Like, So I made the scribble first, and then make this wounded part, and then I place I chisel out the marble on the front to fit it to the pedestal, and then I place the earrings over here to match to the marble marble stuff to the earrings, and that's why I choose to show. And yeah, so it's the earring, like so the earring are placed as if they're an earring stand, and that are similar to the appearance in front. And yeah, this is the pedestal for key holders. You see the key holder, and then make this one, and then all the ratio is based on golden ratio, like that is affected by smartphone that is designed as a golden ratio. And this one also the extension of the experiment. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Nari. You have some very, very large and strong gestures for someone who's afraid to take up space in the Bronx Museum or disturb other people's spaces. Yeah. Well, that's great. I feel like I have more to talk about, but I also am conscious of the time and want to make sure that the audience is able to ask questions for any of the artists that have been sharing their work. And okay, well, there are 3 questions so far, and of course I invite the rest of the audience. We can't see you, but we know you're there to write in questions. There's one question for Eliza from Jamie, which asks, I'm curious if there was an attempt to work with indigenous communities.
Sure, that's a great question and a fair question, especially when one considers the Oklahoma context. The short answer is no. I mean, I have not been successful in working with indigenous organizations yet. It is legally very complex. I easily could have just deeded this property to a local nation. In this case, it would have been the Muskogee Nation, and I could have been done with it. However, they're subject to the same issues that I am. It would not have protected the land from fracking. However, there are ways to gift property to native nations such that it is much harder for fossil fuel companies to access. Finding the legal help to make that happen is a non-trivial challenge. I've talked to well over a dozen lawyers about this particular issue, and because there are risks involved, there are career risks for the lawyers, and I suppose those like myself who do have assets, they would like to put in the custodians of those nations who would care for them. It's probably not a very satisfying answer, but something I would, when I in different contexts, when I've had a little bit longer to talk about the history of this project, I give 2 land acknowledgements, one for the Muskogee Nation and the other for Black landowners, because the Oklahoma property is in Northeast Oklahoma. It's in Creek County, not because there are lots of waterways, because it is the home to the Creek Muskogee Nation. And because I started this project practically on the centennial of the Tulsa Massacre. And many of those Black Tulsans who were violently divested of their lives and property, came to Oklahoma as the either as members of those tribes or as enslaved people of those tribes. Hence their very long standing residence in Oklahoma. So there are other properties and other opportunities. I haven't quit, but I'm sorry to say that I don't have a satisfying answer to your question.
Okay, Eliza, thanks for taking that. I have a question now for Carlos. Starts with a comment, and I'll try to pronounce this right. Artist Shimabuku created a performative project called The Taste of Foreign Sake Pariña. The idea came to him when he took part in the 2006 Sao Paulo Biennale. He developed a recipe in which he used Japanese sake instead of kachaka to create his sake pariña. And it was served in Berlin. Shimabuku and artist Damien Ortega staged a performance involving a bar in which they advertised using a neon flourish inside the DAD gallery. There's also a collective in Basel named, it's just like 5 F's in a row, that works with the fermentation process, and they recently made a performance called Mother Maize, introducing chicha. Carlos, is there a performative aspect of your chicha project drink, or have you considered it?
Yeah, I want to thank the person for the question. The short answer is no, not in any sense as referenced in the artist mentioned above. The longer answer is that I think when we say performative, I think we're thinking in an art historical sense, and that's not exactly what I'm looking at, not looking at Western ideologies. To think more about this term performance, performing is things that we do every day, speaking as we all right now, or listening. And to me, the very act of taking something, as I was saying before, rarely do we engage in a manifest and corporeal way with aspects of indigenous culture. And the very act of taking something and imbibing it and forming communion with a piece of indigenous culture, that to me is a fairly radical act of performance. So in that sense, perhaps yes.
Thank you. And now there's a question for all three of you, which is interesting given the material and conceptual nature of these works and immaterial. Gabino asks, first of all, it's great to learn about each of your artistic practices. May you please talk about how the current body of work can become collectible, or do you want it to be collectible? Does anyone want to respond to that? Well, I guess in Carlos's case, there will be some kind of small business in which the work can be purchased, right? And drunk in some way. I'm not sure how, in which way that would be advertised, or who can collect it or buy the product in that sense. But that is a question.
Sure.
I mean, all works, they seem to be participatory, at least Eliza and Carlos.
I don't mean to perform like sophistry when I guess try to think about these terms in different ways. But when we think about collecting something, we think about exchange of money. But think about the way that we've gone from little infants to grown human beings that happen from collecting materials from the earth. And so in that sense, my project is profoundly collectible in the sense that it will become literally a part of your body.
Yeah, I'll just contribute that people, participants and All the Way to Hell are getting yeah, I geeked out one day and calculated just how much volume of minerals people are acquiring by participating in the project, just more because I thought it was funny. But it is an asset that they can give away or subdivide themselves. And the fact that, yeah, I'm giving it away is immaterial. literally and figuratively. So they are getting something beyond, obviously that's it's kind of what they get as participating in the project. But is there a commercial value to this project? If that's the real question, no, and that's fine.
That would be such an interesting proposition. Well, just sell it in the end, right?
Oh, well,
7,000 owners, and then the land is for sale,
Well, here, there is one in the very beginning, because there is a lot of overhead associated with this particular work. I did think about selling them individually for like, $10, $30, $40, whatever, to cover the legal costs. And it turns out that would have been a felony, because minerals are investments and they are regulated by the SEC. So I actually had to pay a lawyer some money to write a document with the rationale how I could give the property away and not run afoul of any SEC laws, and it completely transformed the project. I mean, this happened very, very early on, and it was by far the best thing that could have happened.
So by nature, it's not, both you and Carlos are creating your own kind of economies in a way. And also Nari, in the same sense of the stockpiling or the preparation during the pandemic with a lack of economy, like a fear of a lack of economy. It's kind of, they're all kind of removed from it in that, in the kind of sense of well, I guess anything could be in a museum collection, but maybe not in the sense that this question is being posed. I also, as we're waiting for any more questions to arise, Ian and I did discuss something about, Nari, in your work, thinking about the stockpile and thinking about this fiery flavor. What would it mean to only have pickles to eat for a couple years?
Right. So yeah, that's really good question, actually. And because for Korean people, like spicy is the essential sense that their food has the spicy flavor all the time, and this flavor for me is really interesting. Like so I'm in New York, in East Harlem. I'm trying to find a food that could substitute my Korean food flavor. So that is the jalapeno pickle that I found. And so we are kind of, so I feel like I'm kind of like a connected with different culture with the same similar flavor. And that kind of connects us together. And also it's like the tasting of some flavor is a very like a subjective experience, but you also experience that, and I also experience that when I'm eating. And so and we didn't, we are pretty far each other. In South Korea, example, like jalapeno pickle is pretty like foreign, quote unquote foreign food for them, and it's not like a daily food they could eat, but like but the taste, the element of the taste, like crispy, sweet, crispy, fiery, sour, those tastes are very familiar with Korean people. So I feel like we're connecting with that sense of taste, and that's what I'm experiencing. And even in East Harlem, like if I'm have a very bad day, I usually go to any bodega and get some rice and beans and with jalapeno. And yeah, it's very comforting to me, and all the ladies over there are really familiar and like friendly. I mean, friendly, and yeah. So I feel like this is my home to be stay, and yeah, and also like under the theme. Can I say something about the theme? And actually, I was very like, yeah. When first Eva suggests this artist talk under the theme ecology, right? Ecology and ecofeminism, right? So I've been thinking about that, and that I found out that this is a very insightful connection between me and ecofeminism, because you know, under like one of the legendary feminists that talked about the housewife work that is pretty much like essential work that we are facing, that is you know, processing food, right? And that they're kind of like a the revolutionary feminists, and talk about we had to get paid enough for our uh, essential work, right, at a household. And the ecofeminism is talking a lot about how patriarchy takes, you know, how it's a similar way to how the war take advantage of environment, and that is the same system that patriarchy takes advantage of women. And so that was a really interesting crossover to me, and so it's really insightful connection between us.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not sure, yeah, if you're speaking about Silvia Federici, but her Wages for Housework program was just, I was thinking about that with the dishwasher in your piece, actually, like, oh, who actually cleans the drinks? Is that you? You know, like thinking about labor and food consumption, and where yeah, where the onus of labor lies in caretaking.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about Dalla Costa. Yeah.
So we have 3 minutes, and we have one more question that I wanted to, I don't know if we're allowed to go over a bit in time, but there was one more question from Federica, which asked, what surprised each of you during or after the process of making these installations? So maybe we can kind of end on this question for all of you, if any sort of surprises came up presenting this work at the Bronx Museum. Does anyone want to take this? Or you could talk about surprises in your process. No surprises?
Well,
actually, I was surprised. Yeah, and actually, like I asked for any leftover space for my video work, for my installation of the jalapeno jar, and and actually, like I really like the space that I was assigned. And because that was even not in the gallery space, that's behind the exit sign, and that is very fitted to my concept of the installation. So yeah, I was very surprised, and that was really good.
Eliza,
I see you're unmiked, or you're unmuted. Did you have something to share?
Well, I shared the big one, which was I didn't know I was a potential felon. But the other is the well core samples themselves. Before turning to art and moving to New York, I spent 20 years in Texas, where I had nothing to do with the oil and gas business, but you can't help but absorb a lot of that information. And I had no idea that these well core samples would be so challenging to get a hold of. I mean, I know tons and tons of petroleum geologists, and none of them had any. They're like, you're not going to get your hands on these. And so yeah, I just, why, like, why are these things so proprietary? And so I shared that a little bit with you, but it was a real shock because I knew I wanted that minerality to be part of the project.
Thanks. And Carlos, do you want to close this out with maybe some kind of surprise that came with the process of growing the corn and translating the fermentation process?
Sure. It's not perhaps insightful, but only that I was surprised that for the installation, this was a lot of fun. I borrowed a friend's car, went on a barge, drove through Governor's Islands, pulled a bunch of corn plants out that I grew with friends, ratchet them to a car, and then drove all up Manhattan to the Bronx to put them in the museum. And nobody seemed to care too much about that. I mean, I didn't get too many looks, that is.
I was actually surprised at the height of the stalks and seeing your work in person. It's quite impressive with that. But they pretty much grew to the height of the exact space that it was designated for. Great. Well, I think that's all the questions, and we're ending kind of exactly on time. So again, I want to thank everyone for sharing your work, and also to be invited to be able to speak with you about your work individually and help platform some of the stories that you're telling.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessica, and all the artists for facilitating this conversation, and also to the curators, Ian and Eva, for organizing this series of talks. I don't know, Ian, if you wanted to say anything as well, or Eva.
No, just thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciated your time, input, and everything. And I think this is fantastic. I really love the conversation. Thank you, and thank you, Angelica, for facilitating.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much for participating in all of these panels, for us to give so much more context to the overall themes that all the artists share, as peers and as creative minds. And in this way, kind of ending on a high note of realizing the kind of cross sections of subjects, of materials, of ideas, and really something really futuristic. The moment that cross-disciplinary moments happen, you realize that they transcend into the imagination, into throughout the different parts of the world, throughout very long histories and roots. And that's something really beautiful, and that it really pushes us forward with great ideas. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.